I've received a letter from the State Department notifying that I'm not wouldn't be permitted in the U.S. if I arrived, and so I'm joining you today via Skype.
Okay, well, we appreciate you joining us. Perhaps you could just talk a bit about what it's like doing quite big business in Cuba. What are the main lessons you've learned that might be applicable to other people who are thinking about in the future taking a similar step?
Well, we've been in Cuba for over 20 years now, and as you mentioned us at the introduction there, we are partners with the Cubans and the different Cuban entities in a number of different businesses, whether it's our mining joint venture with the mine in Moa in eastern Cuba, or our power business, which is a 1/3 joint venture with both the QPET, the state-owned oil company, and UNI, the state-owned electricity company. And we have our oil business as well, where we sell oil to QPET. We've done business in different jurisdictions over the years, and and every jurisdiction has its unique characteristics and attributes. Doing business in Cuba, in the grand scheme of things, though, is not different than any other foreign investment challenge. You need to understand how things work on the ground. You need to invest the time to build relationships with people on the ground. You need to earn the trust and respect of your partners on the ground. And you need to continually earn that when you're there. And that takes different forms in different jurisdictions. But like any foreign investment, if you're not proving your worth to the local country and they don't have trust and respect for you, and you don't show trust and respect for them, it's not going to work.
I mean, one of the restrictions you face is that you're not free to hire and fire freely. No? You have to go through government contracting agency. I mean, some foreign investors in Cuba have found that a real difficulty, no? That you can't reward staff properly, and you run the risk that if you do make extra payments which you think they deserve, then that causes problems for them and so on, and might cause problems for you as an investor. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, we have dealt with that and other issues over the years. I mean, generally we have found workforce issues in Cuba have not been a big impediment to success there. We've generally found highly educated, skilled, and dedicated employees. Working with joint venture partners, I mean, you need to invest the time to understand what their particular concerns are and what the issues is they're trying to address. But generally, we found that us and our partners have common objectives in terms of seeing our joint ventures succeed, and we've generally been able to work through those issues and get the staffing we need to succeed. We run a mine in eastern Cuba with very few expats. We're heavily dependent on local national personnel, and that has been part of our success there.
And you're able to reward your Cuban managers adequately?
We've been able to reward them and consistently with what they do in their other operations. We've always been able to have conversations with our partners to ensure that that staff are being compensated for what they do and to achieve the objectives that we set each year with our joint venture for the partnership. We always have debates with our partners about how we could do that better. But no, I can't say that has ever been a real impediment to success for us.
Cuba approved a new foreign investment law last year, which changes some things. There is a new appetite, or renewed appetite, let's say, in the Cuban government for foreign investment. Can you give us your comments on, your views on the foreign investment law, how it affects you, how it will affect new investors in Cuba, to what extent it addresses problems or doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's very positive, the steps they've taken in the foreign investment law. I mean, it's quite separate from the issues that they face with the embargo and other issues. They have generally accepted and publicly acknowledged that they do need foreign investment, and that foreign investment is an important part of their future growth, both through access to capital and access to foreign technology. They absolutely, as a government and as a country, recognize the need and the value of that. And I think we've helped deliver that to them over the years. The foreign investment law was really the first change that we had to our joint venture agreement in over 20 years. When we first signed our joint venture for the mining operation in 1994, it was a long, drawn-out affair where we negotiated for several months, where not just the terms of the joint venture itself, but also the fiscal regime under which the joint venture was going to operate. That included tax rates and royalty rates. And we saw great stability in that for over over 20 years, and the first change we saw to that was unilaterally made by the Cubans in the foreign investment law when we actually saw our tax rates of the joint venture go down. So they recognize their need to be competitive in the world against the other jurisdictions in which they are competing for foreign investment dollars. They still look to and expect to be able to maintain some degree of control and sovereignty over the terms on which foreign investment is going to come into the country. And I think there will be a process as they go through and start to work with new foreign investors where they will take their time to come to determine whether they trust and believe that they can work well with new foreign investment partners. But absolutely, I certainly saw the foreign investment law as a progressive step forward from the Cuban government, and an acknowledgement that foreign investment is a big part of their future growth plans.
I mean, going forward, the government is putting a lot of emphasis on the Mariel special economic zone and has high hopes for that. I mean, does Cuba risk a kind of dual economy in relation to foreign investment as well as in relation to state and non-state and CUC and CUP? I mean, is there going to be another dualism there, or do you think that over time the same conditions that apply to Mariel will be applied to foreign investors elsewhere?
I think in time, I mean, I think they certainly have, as you've probably already been discussing this morning around Mariel, they are looking at creating some free trade zones and some preferential treatment potentially for foreign investors in particular sectors to get that area off the ground. I think more broadly, and you've probably spoken a bit about the dual currency structure in that as well this morning, I think their intention is to move to a more standardized form across the country, and I suspect that will also be their plan at Mariel over the longer term. Certainly they recognize that the dual currency structure is an impediment to longer term foreign investment just because of the uncertainty that creates, and I suspect they won't be keen to create more uncertainty with structures around Mariel. But they are prepared to, I think, have conversations around things at Mariel, particularly in the early stages of development there, to facilitate and start demonstrating what Mariel could be capable of.
Right, I'm just going to see if there are any questions from the audience. I think we'll take them manually on this because I'm not sure that we can see you and see this Slido technology which has the questions. So there's a question over here. Perhaps you can identify yourself and
Hello, my name is Daniel Guerra. I'm a Cuban lawyer based in Boston now, working for a U.S. law firm. I was in Cuba this year doing research. I actually wrote an article on foreign investment law, and I basically asked questions to foreign investors in Cuba, and one of the questions was, what was the main risk that they had to face? And obviously they mentioned the main risk was basically not violating U.S. law, because they were very concerned about. They said basically we need to seek legal advice from a U.S. law firm, from a domestic law firm, a Canadian law firm, I believe, and then from a Cuban law firm to know how to do business in Cuba. Apart from that, there is any other risk that you would like to share with us that you have faced? How have you been able to get your money back easily? Like we want to know if there is any other risk as a foreign investor that you have faced in Cuba. Thank you.
Well, I think as going into a new jurisdiction, whether it's Cuba or any other country where you haven't done business before, has a variety of risks that go with it in terms of understanding the way business is conducted in country, understanding how local laws are going to interact with the laws under whatever jurisdiction you're coming from, and whether that's going to cause you complexity or conflict between those laws. Understanding local custom, understanding how you're going to be able to hire and fire people, understanding how you're going to be able to source your supplies. There are all a whole host of issues that you face setting up a new investment in any jurisdiction, and Cuba is no different from any of that, and Cuba has its own unique attributes on any number of those things, as many jurisdictions do. When we first went to Cuba in the early 90s, Cuba was a very different place in that the Soviets had packed up and left on them earlier, very recently before we first came in, and Cuba was having a very difficult time economically, and certainly there were investments there that had not been upkept and maintained to the standard to which we would look to run, and that was part of the opportunity for us when we first went and formed the joint venture in MOA. There was real opportunity for us to bring some of our expertise as an operating company with some particular expertise in the processes that were used at the mine in Moa to really add some value there. So I can't point today to any unique risk. You highlighted a couple in your question there. Those are all the kinds of things that a foreign investor needs to get their mind around in any jurisdiction.
There's another question here.
Good morning. My name is Bill Messina. I'm with the University of Florida, and I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on some of the agricultural joint venture investments that Sherritt has had in Cuba, greenhouse vegetable production, and maybe anything else. Thank you.
Yeah, we did have a couple minor investments in some agriculture production back probably in the late 90s. I'll confess those were before my time at Sherritt. At one point in time, after about 1995, Sherritt was looking to expand and go into a variety of different businesses in Cuba, and soybeans, amongst others. We had a couple interests in hotels at the time. We've been out of those businesses for quite some time, so I'll confess that my information on agricultural joint ventures is probably not as current as some others you might have in the room there. Speaking personally, I would certainly say agriculture is a tremendous opportunity in country, and those of you who've been there and looked at that side of the business, I'm sure have seen that, and just from the climate and the geography and its proximity. Cuba should certainly be capable of more agricultural production than it is, and I think that is one area where they are looking to see some improvement in the production compared to what they've been able to produce over the last few years.
We heard this morning of the Cuban government's interest to boost investment in renewable energy. Is that an area that's of interest to you that you're likely to get into?
Not imminently. I know certainly as they look at their energy plan for the future, we certainly talk with them pretty regularly about the electricity generation and the oil business, and they're looking for alternative sources of electricity generation. Ministry of Energy and Mines, I think, has been quite public domestically and internationally about their interest in wind and their interest in solar. And I know they've been talking to different people about how that might further develop. I know they've got some sites where they've done a fair bit of work in terms of their feasibility and appropriateness for wind development. At the moment, we've been pretty focused on our existing operations and looking to extend the life of our oil business there. Get our power businesses up to running at full capacity, and what is currently a pretty tough nickel environment, keeping our nickel mine running well.
And how does the current oil price affect the prospects for oil and gas in Cuba? I mean, there were some wells drilled offshore a few years ago. I remember one oil man describing one of them as one of the driest wells that he'd seen anywhere. I mean, do you see scope for development there?
So we have certainly we believe we leave some scope for development. We signed up a couple new blocks with the Cubans about a year ago, and we've spent this past year reprocessing seismic and identifying some drilling locations and dealing with permitting issues. And we're looking to be drilling on a new block for us in 2016, a little to the east of Veradero. The holes I think you were talking about are more in the deeper water. The drilling we do is actually onshore, and then we horizontally drill out underneath the seabed, but close to shore, sort of 4, 5, 6 kilometers are our holes typically. There have been a couple of larger scale investments in offshore drilling, in deeper water, but still in Cuban waters, and there's some further discussion of that in the future. U.S. Geological Survey suggests that there are formations similar to the oil production off the U.S. Gulf Coast or the Mexican Gulf Coast that potentially also appealing in deeper water in Cuban waters for the same kinds of discoveries. That, frankly, is a game for companies with deeper pockets than us, given the scope and the kind of capital you're talking to drill those kinds of holes. But I think there is still some potential optimism around that, and some discussions as to who may be willing to make the investment in a future drill hole there or two. Okay,
a final question. You are affected by Helms-Burton because the mine that you operate before the revolution belonged to U.S. investors, right? And was then taken over by the state. And and at the moment, as you know, or shortly, the conversations between the U.S. government and the Cuban government about claims are going to start. To what extent are you an interested party in that conversation? How do you see that conversation?
I think that conversation will play out over the coming months. It's obviously one of the more significant hurdles to normalization of whatever that may mean as between the U.S. government and the Cuban government. I know there are many claims of U.S. investors dating back to the revolution and the days and the months immediately after the revolution, and so I know the Cubans have made claims. I mean, we're certainly interested in seeing how that plays out, and certainly interested in seeing it resolved ultimately. Our view has always been that that really is a matter that will ultimately get resolved between the two governments at whatever time communications are kind of more geared and more motivated towards some kind of solution on that. I think timing remains to be seen as to when that will exist on both sides for a more permanent solution to that. But I think the solution ultimately will have to be something all-encompassing that is part of some broader package on both sides that leads to a more normal relationship between the two countries.
Well, thank you very much, David, for sharing these insights with us, which I'm sure have been very useful for people here. We hope that on some future occasion we're able to talk to you in person.
I hope we'll be able to do that. I'm sure one of these days that'll be the case. So thanks very much.
So thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.